Uh, Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our Faculty of Agricultural and Food Sciences conversation series. My name is Dr. Nazim Chichek. I'm the Associate Dean Research in the faculty, and the title of today's seminar is Closing the Loop, Recycling Food Waste in Integrated Crop Livestock Production Systems. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba is located on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So I'm pleased to welcome you back to our online faculty seminar series. We began this conversation series in 2020 to bring together our researchers, their partners, and community collaborators to discuss some of the really interesting work that happens here in our faculty. If you missed our previous seminars, there's an opportunity to view them right here on our faculty's YouTube channel. Or, as another option, you can also find links to the seminars at our knowledge translation portal, which we call the Manitoba Agriculture and Food Knowledge Exchange, or makemanitoba.ca. That website highlights our faculty's research as it relates to consumers and producers, with links to a number of resources, which include infographics, a variety of podcasts, fact sheets, and even some recipes. So today, we have three speakers who will share with us a short summary of their research and then engage in a conversation. You, as a viewer, can participate in this conversation by sending your questions and comments to us via chat platform. And right now, I'd like to call on Crystal Jorgensen, the faculty's communications specialist, to provide some guidance on how the audience can actually participate in today's presentation. Crystal?
Hi, everyone. Really glad you could join us today, and we look forward to your questions and comments. We are using the chat platform slido.com. Once you get there, so just go to www.slido.com. You can enter the access code #food, the number 2, feed, so food to feed. And then you can enter your question or your comment. But just a caution that the character count can be a little bit limited, so try to keep your questions or comments quite concise. And we'd also like to kick it off by just asking you where you're watching us from. So if you don't mind entering that, and then listen on and enter your questions as we go. And we'll come back to that later. Thanks, Nazim.
Awesome. Thanks, Crystal. So we'll review these instructions once again right before the Q&A starts, just in case you join us late. So today's topic explores recycling food waste. And as we look to ways to reduce environmental impacts, this is a really important area and close to my heart as well. We know that food waste is produced across the supply chain and poses negative environmental, social, and economic consequences. And today we will be exploring how livestock can play a key role in using food waste by converting this low value material into high value products. We also know that there's a number of challenges regarding the utilization of food waste. These include things like regulatory restrictions, some safety concerns, logistical issues associated with the collection, the transport, and the handling of these type of products. So making sure that we address these challenges will ensure that we have an improved stability and resiliency of our food supply chain, which we all know continues to be threatened by global pressures and climate change. So today, we'll hear from two researchers and a livestock producer who are exploring how utilization of food waste really allows us to redefine the crop livestock integration at the landscape level as part of a broader circular bioeconomy. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our guests. So please welcome Kim Ominski. Kim is a professor in the Department of Animal Science. Since joining the University of Manitoba, Kim has established a multidisciplinary research program improving the productivity and sustainability of forage-based beef production systems. Kim enjoys collaborating with researchers from across Canada, as well as sharing her research findings with producers and consumers. And Kim also considers herself fortunate to teach in both the degree and diploma programs here at the U of M. So welcome, Kim. I'd also like you to welcome Herman Peters, the Nutrition and Agronomy Program Manager at Birkeland Farms. Herman graduated with a diploma in agriculture from the U of M. He has several other connections with our faculty, as he and his brother-in-law Conrad have hosted our degree and diploma students at their farm, and he's also currently collaborating on a research project with us. Herman has worked in the feed industry for many years and launched the beef nutrition and forage service company, Western Farm Service, in 2005. In 2017, Herman began providing nutrition services at Birkeland Farms, and he also added approximately 4,000 acres of agronomy services, including fertility planning, soil sampling, crop scouting, and custom cattle feeder invoicing. So welcome, Herman.
Thank you.
And finally, I'd like to introduce Tim McAllister. Tim obtained his MSc in animal biochemistry at the University of Alberta and his PhD in rumen microbiology and nutrition from the University of Guelph. Today, Tim is a principal research scientist at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Lethbridge, Alberta, where he's in charge of a diverse research program handling various projects, including the development of strategies to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, improve water use efficiency, investigate antimicrobial resistance, and improve food safety and reduce food waste. His most recent area of interest is on the role that livestock production systems play in maintaining biodiversity and provision of ecosystem services. He's presently the chair of the Livestock Environmental Assessment Partnership, or LEAP, program of the FAO, and is the co-host of the popular Cows on the Planet podcast. So hello, Tim.
Thanks very much, Nassim. Great to be here.
It's great to have you. All right, so I'd like to begin by asking our speakers some general questions before we open it up to the larger audience. So let's start with you, Kim. The United Nations and many other countries, including Canada, have made controlling food waste a priority. Can you start us off by telling us the scope of this type of problem in Canada and how livestock can play a role in it?
Sure, Nazim. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to start, Nazim, maybe by talking a little bit about what food waste is, because I think obviously people have different perceptions about what that means. And really, food waste is anything that we can talk about that starts, maybe from commodity production through to byproducts and all the way through to retail and even household food waste. Sometimes you'll hear people use the definition of food loss, and that really is everything from the production up to supply until we get to the retail level, and then food waste often refers to everything after that. So I'm going to pop up just to ask Dan and Mike to pop up the first slide, and so we can think about, what is the hierarchy or recovery of food waste, and how do livestock fit into that? And I think we would all agree that if you can just go back up one, I think we would all agree.
One more, maybe.
Yeah, just back up one more, if you don't mind, Dan and Mike. There we go. That's it. Thanks ever so much. I think we would all agree that the most ideal avenue to reduce food waste is simply that. We all have a social responsibility, and it's certainly something we can all do in our own homes to reduce food waste. Next, in terms of strategies or desirable strategies, include donating that excess food. And where that's not possible, products, for example, maybe have exceeded the best before date, and we look at opportunities then to divert that food waste into livestock feed. And both of those, donating excess food and as well as utilizing it for livestock, certainly help us in terms of improving food security. The last two on that list include composting and diversion to landfill. And certainly in the whole hierarchy, with the most desirable being at the top and the least desirable being at the bottom, that's the avenue that we least prefer. So now let's talk about, the role of livestock in this circular bioeconomy. So I'm going to ask you to pop up that last slide again, Dan and Mike, and so we can take a look at, what we typically think about as a crop livestock production system. That's it right there. And in a typical crop livestock production system, integrated crop livestock production, and that can occur either on farm or between farms. We have a livestock production system that generates manure. That manure then can go onto the landscape. It serves to improve soil quality, which then leads to increased crop yields. And those crops, both cereals and forages, can go back to feed livestock. And that, circular bioeconomy so continues. So now let's talk about how food waste fits into that system. And really, in my mind, I think about that occurring sort of at three levels. The first is that we have those crops, and we have, so I'm going to call that livestock commodity integration. And we have examples of all three of these levels that occur in Manitoba and across Canada. So let's talk about that first one. And at that livestock commodity integration, we have, for example, cull potatoes that might be fed to cattle. And that's really the level of commodity to commodity integration.
Right.
The next one is where we have, byproducts. So let's talk about processing, for example, and where these byproducts from processing can go back to livestock. And the most recent example that we have here in Manitoba is with the manufacturing and now, coming online, the new Roquette plant. And that plant, has a number of co-products, if you will, that come from it. They generate, pea isolates for human consumption, but they also generate things like pea screenings, pea hulls, and even pea cream that can then be utilized for livestock. And these are contractual agreements or arrangements between producers and processors. And certainly we're using precision livestock feeding systems to be able to best optimize production with these products. And then finally, in the top left corner, where we have, think about livestock going towards food, but we can also have the other direction where food comes back towards livestock. And that's where we have livestock retailer relationships. And that includes things like, for example, bakery waste, or it could include, imperfect fruits and vegetables that can come back to livestock. So, it's important to think about this, definition or redefining crop livestock integration, beyond the on-farm level to either, commodity to commodity, producer to processor, and then even producer to retailer. So that was a pretty long answer to a pretty short question, Nazem. So I'm going to throw it back to you.
No, I love the introduction. It really defines things for us all a little bit better and gives us some great jumping points. So that's perfect. Thanks, Kim. Herman, if I can turn it over to you, I understand that you are using several of these byproducts on your farm, and even have a video footage that kind of shows or demonstrates how they are incorporated into Birkeland farms. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Nazem. Yeah, the first portion of the video that you'll see was done up by the University of Saskatchewan Feedlot School. They came out last year and did a bit of actually a very nice presentation that they put together for us. And at the end, you'll see some footage as well. That's the pea cream delivery. That's our first delivery of the year that we've seen. The plant has, just been chugging along, trying to get going, and they've had some areas that have slowed them down as well. So we saw our first load. We haven't started feeding. We're waiting for, a consistent supply, and that's always the thing with byproducts. You look for that consistent supply coming in. Right. So, but yeah, I'll give it over to you guys for the video part of it.
A lot of waste potatoes coming out of storage, out of the plants, out of the Winkler area, and be it either a cull or the size isn't right or the quality isn't right, and those potatoes bump out pretty heavy typically after harvest, and again depending on the time of year when they're busy at the plants shipping potatoes out. So for us, we've seen it as an energy source. We definitely, if you want to compare it to another grain, it would be similar to barley. It'll be running at about an 83 TDN, probably about a 10.5 protein, and about an 80 to 85% moisture on most of the potatoes. I hadn't worked with potatoes much. I seen different producers doing it, and I seen some of them would go up to 75 to 100% of the diet was potatoes. I mean, of course they had to get some roughage in just to keep the rumen functioning, but seeing some of those numbers, we didn't feel comfortable with that. All the performance that we've seen that we can get out of these cattle, we find we're probably going to run between 20 to maybe 50%, but usually it's between 20 and 40% inclusion on a dry matter basis. The potatoes arrive, again, we try to get them into the bunk, and freshness is so important. In wintertime, one of the challenges is freezing potatoes, so sometimes we'll roll them right away and then get them into a pile and feed them that way, get a little more heating through that process. And then from there, Yeah, when the guys do their rations, I mean, we feed twice a day, so they're included in all of our rations that we run on a performance beef system that we have in the tractors and in the trucks. So they're all fed through that system, summer and winter. Summer, again, we try to keep freshness. We don't want to get green on those potatoes. That is an issue as well. Probably the biggest challenge right away was how do we break it down, right? Like, how do we get it into a form where the cattle aren't going to choke on it? And we have to find a way to break it, but not too far. And if we process too early, what we find is we lose our shelf life really quick. We have to keep it in a solid form as long as we can. And then once we start breaking, we usually start feeding. And again, freshness from the plant to us, not getting those potatoes too cold is important and not getting them too hot. We get quality breaking down at both ends. It's a roller mill essence that we're using here, although it is pretty much steel fingers stationary on one side, and then you've got a rotating finger coming through on the other side, and it's breaking those potatoes. And really all we're trying to do is get a break on them, just to prevent that choking side of it, and if we can, to prevent some sorting. And that's a little bit tough because the cattle know what they're looking for, and they look at potatoes as candy once we start dropping into the bunk. Instead of dropping all our feed into the bunk, offload everything in one shot, the guys will actually do either halves or thirds, depending on how it works out running through the lot. But everybody will get a shot. Cattle will move up. They're looking for potatoes. Once the potatoes run out, they got to get into the ration. So then later on, maybe an hour and a half or so later, they come in again, they'll drop another drop, and then the guys that have been standing there eating potatoes, they're probably full, back it out, and then the next group comes in, and we sort of try to break up that diet a bit that way. We store our potatoes, again, in the bunker that you'll see behind me. We don't have a roof over it at this point. We do have enough volume moving through that we usually don't have a problem, that we do have to cover it from the top. I mean, rain is only going to clean it, snow is only going to clean it, so it's really not a big deal. But again, everything is moved from the bunker into the processor, back into the loader, and into the feed truck, and it's a pretty quick process, really.
All right, we're back at it. Well, that was really interesting. Thanks, Herman. And I will refer to potatoes from now on as cow candy. So that's I'm going to keep that in mind. We did see a little bit there at the end on the pea cream side of things. Did you want to comment on that at all before I move on?
Sure. It's thanks, Nazim. When we get it in, we're looking at about 50 degrees Celsius temperature of the product coming in. It was we were surprised initially how warm it was coming, and when they drop it into our tanks, it's warm. I mean, it's going to be nice in winter. I think it'll be easier for us to handle that with the piping and everything else. This first load came in when we were in that minus 30 degree weather, and the guy had no issue moving it through. And so no, it'll be interesting. We put a little bit into one of our feed mixes just to get a feel for it. And one of the first things I was looking for is just to see if the cattle would react to it as a new ingredient. And they did notice it. The feeder in the truck who's feeding every day said there was a little bit of a response, and that's common on new ingredients. But again, palatability should be there. Awesome.
Well, that's cool. It's interesting to see that you can diversify your byproduct stream and look at different ones. So that's going to help you in the long run, right? So yes, provide you with some resilience. It's great. Yep. Thanks, Herman. I'm going to move on and give Tim the floor as well. Maybe, Tim, you can share with us some of the challenges associated with utilizing these byproducts for livestock feed. I know every story has two sides, so maybe you can address that for us a little bit.
Sure, I can do that, Nazim. So I also want to emphasize, though, there's a lot of byproducts that are already used in the feed industry. It's already a very important part of the industry, for things like canola meal, distillers grains. Those things have been around for quite some time. So part of the research program that we're collaborating on is really to try to do a better job of using the food waste that's out there that's currently not flowing into the as livestock feed. There are some challenges with that, though. Like one of the big ones is variation in the feed quality. There, depending upon the stream that you're tapping into, if you're particularly the retail or the restaurant, food waste is highly predictable in terms of unpredictable in its composition. And that can prove a challenge for livestock producers because we are required to continuously reformulate the diets as that byproduct changes. If you got a setup like Herman does, where he's got a little more consistent supply of potatoes coming in, you could see how he's worked that into his ration plan, and he plans on those potatoes being there, each time he's mixing up a diet. So it just makes for more uniformity. The other thing that's can be an issue is access. Those supply chains of those byproducts can be variable, particularly again in the retail or restaurant sectors where it's unknown and quite subject to supply, from the original producers of those foodstuffs wherever they may be in the world. Lots of that material is imported into Canada as well. If you can establish a relationship, again, like Herman's done, with a larger food processor that's in Canada, that access can be more consistent, contracts can be signed, and arrangements can be made for that material to be more readily available. And of course, then one of the big implications as well is transport. Most of that material is quite high in water. It has a high moisture content. And as a result, then it can be quite expensive to transport it over long distances. With some of the byproducts like distillers grains, we dry that down, and then that enables us to be able to transport it far further distances, across Canada. And then along with that moisture content can also pose problems with storage. So if there's moisture there, none of this stuff is sterile. So there's microbes associated with it, and they can start to cause deterioration if it's not stored in a manner that prevents them from growing and starting to use that byproduct or food waste as a substrate for the growth of the microorganisms. Now, we can do things like ensile it, just like we do with the forages that we ensile for cattle. We can stabilize that food waste in that manner, and then it can be kept for longer periods of time and fed over longer periods. Herman mentioned that with his operation there, he's got a pretty fast turnover in that potato pit, so decomposition or those kinds of issues are less of an issue for him with the way he's got that set up there as well. And the other thing is that, and a lot of these models, like the profitability of the original manufacturer. So if we take example, the plant-based protein group that we were just talking about with the pea cream, it's quite dependent on the value, there being value in those byproducts. They can't afford to have those byproducts, that their main protein is related to the alternative protein source that's, used for the burgers and that we see now in the restaurants and that. And there has to be value in those byproducts in order for their business plan to be economically viable as well. So they need to consider that as well. And ruminants do a good job of that because of their ability to use those high fiber byproducts, better than what poultry or in many cases swine can do as well. But we also then have to be cognizant, some of these have not been fed to livestock in Canada. So there are regulations that we have to go through with CFIA with regard to novel feedstuffs. We have to obviously make sure that these materials are safe for consumption by the livestock, don't cause any animal health or welfare concerns, and continue to produce, a safe and affordable and plant protein product that can then enter the human market for consumption. And then, probably one of the biggest challenges we see is really in the retail and the restaurant sector, where you also have a lot of variability, like I mentioned, and also packaging issues. A lot of the packaging, we want to reduce the plastics. We've heard about that, the desire to reduce the amount of plastics we're releasing into the environment. Well, those plastics cause a lot of issues as well with food waste, because we have to remove that packaging from the system as well if we're going to use that as feed in the long run. So those are just a few of the things that we're addressing and trying to come up with solutions to within our research team. So back to you, Nessa.
Yeah, excellent. And you can clearly see it's not as simple as it might sound from the onset. There's lots of issues to wrap your head around. I guess at this point, what I'd like to do is open the floor up to a more general discussion by this group. maybe we can focus on some of the benefits and constraints of using food waste in livestock feed, and also maybe talk a little bit about the challenge our producers have faced just recently with obviously the drought and therefore access to feed, and how maybe these type of strategies that Herman has employed and we're talking about can provide some additional resilience there. So I'll open the floor up. Maybe Kim, you want to start us off?
Sure. So definitely, this last past summer, we have lots of calls from producers, and even in our dialogues with people from Manitoba Agriculture about, what about feeding this or what about feeding that? Things that we, typically or traditionally haven't fed, or have fed very little of, just because feed costs, feed availability first of all, and then certainly driving up feed costs. Have created some constraints, and we expect to see that, obviously in the future as we, battle through or continue to battle climate change. And so, as Tim has said, many of these feedstuffs provide us with opportunities, obviously as long as they're approved by CFIA, in order to take these relatively low quality proteins and then turn them into high quality protein for human consumption. We are looking at not only exploring sort of these new markets, but looking at ways that we can, things like, Tim talked about ensiling, carrots and other high moisture feedstuffs, and utilizing those as part of a regular feeding stream.
Right. Now, I remember working with distiller dry grains in the past on pelletizing them along with oat hulls and other things and having access to the right kind of moisture, storage conditions, making sure that whatever pellet you're producing can be done. Like it's not straightforward. You really have to consider a bunch of things there. And I think the moisture content, like Tim mentioned, is probably one of the main factors there for sure in terms of shelf life of those products.
And I'd also say, Nazim, if I could just add one more thing, I think it's really important, and I think Herman alluded to this. And these are taking these feedstuffs and using precision feeding strategies in order to optimize productivity and utilization of the products, right? So it's not just a random combination. It certainly is very structured and very strategic.
Right. Herman, did you have to invest in additional infrastructure when you decided to bring some of these byproducts onto your farm? And or did you have the tools available to you already with precision feeding, or maybe some of the tools you're already using?
Well, the grinder that you guys saw in the video, that was one thing definitely we had to, and it took us a little bit to get that set up in such a way that we were getting high flow through it, so that when the guys are starting to load those trucks, that they have the amount of product that they need there. They didn't want to wait for product, right? Like, let's keep this stream flowing. And again, we're trying to break the potatoes as best we can, just to stay away from choking. We normally don't see that as an issue, especially once cattle have adapted to the potatoes. And the fresher they are, the better they work. As the potato gets older, it becomes almost like an old shoe. It gets a little tough. And that's where we may run into a little bit of lodging. I know our video had a little component of that as well, where we actually have a tool that we can slide down the throat. We've designed it with our veterinarian and pull a potato and slice it on our way out. And it's kind of a neat little tool if we ever run into that issue, but it's very seldom. It's amazing how quick those cattle adapt to it. And with our cattle numbers having gone up, something I didn't mention earlier, is it makes it easier to adjust that potato in the diet, because the flow isn't always consistent either. When that product starts coming from the plants, we'll have our peak runs certain times of the year. So I'll bump those rations. Now with the amount of head we have, I usually don't like to go over 30% dry matter. So we'll run it between 20 and 30, and we'll bring a group on only once we feel we have the consistency there. And we don't like to, at least I don't like to make too many changes in the diet. Let's keep the consistency as much as we can once we are running. So we added another farm, another 3,500 head this last year. And it looks like with Peat Cream coming to the site where we have the potatoes right now, they're conflicting a little bit on what they're doing. They're bringing a lot of moisture to the diet. One thing which is a bit of a surprise is the potato is running about 83% moisture. The Peat Cream that we're pumping is around 80. So we're actually wetter in the potato than we are in the Peat Cream itself. And so it does add a lot of moisture to the diet. That's something that, again, when it gets really cold outside, there are some challenges there as well. Sorting is always an issue. That's something that, especially when you get to finishing cattle, you try to keep it as consistent as you can in the diet. And there we really have to watch the sorting. And there is a degree of sorting happening. We've thought of many different ways of processing that potato. And that's why we'll probably drop 3 times in the morning and 3 times in the afternoon. We'll drop at a bunk just for that reason, just to give everybody a crack at it. So it doesn't come without some challenges. There are extra costs with it. And obviously, the economics of it just work out. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it, right? It's been a good little trade for us.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
And Tim, you had mentioned, it's a bit more challenging when you're looking at post-restaurant or consumer products, or maybe even what comes from your Sobeys or Safeways, when things get wasted and the consistency of that product. Did you want to comment on that a little bit more? Obviously, one way to do it is hook up with a food processor like Herman has, and that's great, but that might not be always available.
Yeah, it's easier to hook up with a larger scale type of processor, that has the volume and produces the product more consistently. It gets the grocery stores, although there's a lot of them, they're spread out. The material that they might be throwing out from one week to the other may vary as well between different grocery stores. In Japan and Korea, they have centralized processing facilities that they basically gather that material up and haul it to a centralized site. It's cooked on site. That helps remove some of the potential food safety worries. Cooking is a great way of inactivating microbes. Right. So they use that as a central processing facility. Now, feed values there, a lot of if you go to Korea and Japan, a lot of the agricultural land there is used strictly for production of food for humans. So their prices in that, and the economics make more sense that they can form some of those centralized facilities. And, if we move to some of the feed shortages we're experiencing in that now, we may see some of those pressures that are going to further increase, the desire to use that surplus or waste food in livestock diets as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Kim, did you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the other thing, though, I think that we've seen here in Canada is, more regional byproduct processing. And, Roquette is a good example, right? Located outside the city of Winnipeg near Portage. But we have other examples as well. We've seen also popping up, a lot of microbreweries, and all of that decentralization helps to facilitate access, as long as you're not further processing it, because if you're doing that centrally, then obviously there's a cost of moving it there and then moving it back again. And the pea cream at Roquette is an example, right, where they're moving that product wet because it's economically viable to do so.
Yeah, and I could see why Herman would have chosen potatoes, being down in Winkler, right? There's got to be a supply nearby, and I think distance plays a huge role, right? Particularly if you're moving a lot of water, whether that's in the potato itself or in some other products. So I think it's critical to have that in mind when you make these decisions. I'm sure producers do already, because it adds to the cost of transport. But I think in the long-term interest of sustainability, we do have to keep in mind what the greenhouse gas footprint of these activities are, and if you're actually benefiting the environment and engaging some of these things or not, right? So there's lots to think about there. That's great. I think one of the things we wanted to do is engage the audience as well, but we'll probably just check with Crystal here that we can chat a little bit longer before we get the first questions in. But in the meantime, audience, feel free to fire off a few comments or questions our way, and let's see if we can't address those. Crystal, did you want to
Sure.
comment?
I'll just give everyone the reminder about how to do the Q&A. If you would like to open up a separate window or use your phone if you have to, and go to www.slido.com and enter the hashtag or access code you see across the bottom of your screen there, food to feed. That'll get you into our platform, and you can pose your question. We'll answer questions in order. Just a reminder to try and keep them a bit concise, because the character count is a bit limited. And I'll just say that we did have a few people respond to my opening query about where they were listening from. So we've got Dwayne listening from Kindersley, people watching from Steinbach. Phil is watching us from Starbuck, Manitoba, snowy Starbuck, Manitoba. So we'll leave it at that. Maybe just have a little more chatter, and then we'll head into some questions right away.
Sure, that's great. Thanks, Crystal. One of the things I guess that's important is when we engage in some new activities in our food system is to gain the trust of the public in those activities. Make sure that there's broad acceptance, and in today's day and age, there's so much information flying around. We want to make sure that they get the facts. And public trust and confidence in our food system is once you lose it, it's hard to get back. So it's got to be a consideration. So if anybody wants to comment on that as well, feel free to do so. Go ahead, Tim.
I think it's a good point. Sam. Like I think it's important that we emphasize that, you know, we're not talking about producers like randomly throwing things into the diet here. You know, this is very calculated. Herman would be doing analysis on those potatoes in his diets. I don't know how some people are doing it weekly. I'm not sure how frequently you do it, Herman, but you know, they're formulating based on the nutritional requirements of the animal. And Herman does that because he wants to maximize the performance and efficiency of growth in those animals, because that's what dictates his profitability. So those kinds of things need to be paid attention. And, you know, not all byproducts are going to fit into all diets at the same time to meet those requirements. And we do have different stages that we can use. You know, that's the ultimate thing, is safety and, you know, fitting in on a least cost formulation to make sure that the animals are going to grow properly. But anything that didn't meet that requirement could go to another process like biodigestion and be used to produce methane gas as for energy or electricity. And then, you know, the final step would be landfill as sort of the last option, because that's going to have a cost associated with its disposal. And then it has the opportunity to produce methane as a greenhouse gas as well. That's not readily captured, or not at least as easy as it is in a biodigester. So there's not just, it's not going to make sense for all byproduct or food waste to go into livestock feed either. We need to be calculated in what we select, but we can definitely do more than we are now, for sure.
Yeah, that's so true. And I want to add to that just quickly. Part of my research program deals with biodigestion or anaerobic digestion, on farm included. And there's some examples in Ontario where food waste comes in, gets pasteurized and fed into digesters. We don't have those examples yet here in Manitoba. But yeah, I mean, if it gets to a point where it's unsafe or not suitable for animal feed, we certainly, you know, that's not going to happen. And other opportunities have to be then found to utilize that waste. But, you know, going down that upside down triangle that Kim started us off with, you know, there's composting, digestion, and hopefully at the very end, landfilling with some gas capture if possible, that, you know, seals it all off. But, you know, we're trying to move up that value chain as best we can. And I think feed fits in there well. Herman or Kim, did you want to comment on that part as well, or should we move on to the audience? Go ahead.
I'm just gonna make a quick comment, Nazem, and maybe just two things. Is you know, certainly we've seen with the work that we're doing along with Herman looking at his rations, you know, both a land sparing effect and a greenhouse gas sparing effect when we are diverting you know, potatoes in this example that we're doing in lieu of cereal grains like barley, for example.
Right.
And then the other thing is that you know, Crystal McKay, who was formerly with the Food Integrity Group, did some, you know, I guess interviews and social media with consumers, just asking this question about what do you think about food waste. And I think that, you know, the response from what I've seen has been very, very positive, right? In the report that she's put together, in terms of, you know, just public perception. People can easily grasp, you know, this concept of diverting waste to livestock, and you know, certainly has some very positive public perception associated with it as well. So, you know, that's another added benefit. Yeah,
makes sense, right? We all produce waste in our kitchens. We're thinking about composting it or doing stuff with it, and it's got to be a positive overall impression of utilizing that waste in some fashion that makes sense. And so I could see that totally there as well. So I think you hear more and more about people worrying about waste streams, and if you can provide them with a valuable alternative, I think there'll be public buy-in. I do have some questions on the tap here, so maybe I'll start us off from the audience. The first one will go to Herman. So the question is, Herman, did you need to change much of your food storage facilities or preparation when introducing potatoes and pea cream into the diet of your cattle? I guess we kind of addressed that, but do you want to reiterate that? Did you have to change a lot in your facilities? Go ahead.
Not a lot. No, the containment area where we actually get the potatoes dumped is one area that we did concrete just to give us a floor and give us a bit of a drain there too. I mean, if we do get a fair bit of rain or that type of thing, just to, you know, be able to remove some of the water so they're actually not sitting in water. But for the most part, I mean, our feed mixers are handling more weight as well. That's something to consider. I mean, we're throwing in a lot more water at the same time. And typically for us, when we look at water, it's often a bit of a negative, because what we're looking for is we're paying for energy on a dry matter basis. And we've often looked at water as being, well, just like Tim mentioned earlier, it's something you have to haul and the distances. But once we get into some of these drought situations we've been getting into, and I look at our water consumption on farm when we come in with these wet products, it's definitely down. I mean, we're definitely not drawing from the well at the same rate we were. And just even looking at last summer when we ran into a lot of our heat, I was very surprised at some of the performance we ran. I had a group of steers actually almost touch 4 pounds average daily gain in the heat. And I think that potato and water, again, is something that they're taking in right while they're consuming their dry matter, they're taking in their water. So there's different areas that we're finding, some interesting results that are coming from it.
Oh, that's cool. That question was from Janine originally. We have a follow-up if you like. There's a question on how does the potato or pea cream affect your mineral package, any interactions or deficiencies, etc. So as you add them to your diet, does that make a difference there?
Yes, our supplement we'll see some changes coming to our supplement. Right now we're running a fairly high protein supplement. It's coming in at 42%. And the pea cream is running right around 23. So once we get that incorporated, it looks like we'll be able to knock our supplement down right around to a 10%, in that range. It'll be sort of an all natural. We won't see a whole lot of other sources coming in. We're really looking forward to that.
That makes sense. Next question here is what types of food waste have you seen used successfully that might surprise us? I guess this could go to any of the panelists here. If you have seen some food waste that has been used in the past in literature or in you have seen or observed, is there any that you can point to that would be a surprise or something of a strange thing that you can point to?
Well, I think probably the capital of that is the California dairy industry, where they get a huge waste products out of the confectionery sector. So you name it, gummy bears, Mars bars, they feed all of that to the cows. So, and it can vary quite a bit depending upon which confectionery product doesn't meet the grade for human consumption. And usually that's related to cosmetic issues. If the gummy bears look like they're melted, they don't sell very well to people, but cows don't mind melted gummy bears.
Well, that's real cow candy there. So that's perfect. No, I love that.
Periodically, we will feed potato chips coming out of Old Dutch as a byproduct as well. They'll come in totes, and they're not as consistent in supply, and they're really high in fat. So we really have to watch our inclusion on them. Yeah, sure. But that is something that we've done in our region as well.
So cows go for chips then? They like that okay, all right?
In a TMR mixer, when we blend it all together, they're not salted or they're not barbecued or anything else. They have no flavor, so they get the plain.
Before you know, they're going to ask for some beer and a TV screen. So yeah, that's awesome. Now, there is a question here in regards to the food to feed sources, how people find each other. I think that's an important question to address because, we are aware, maybe we are not aware at times what's available out there. So do you know how these relationships tend to be formed between the suppliers of the food waste and the users of them as feed? Is there an exchange? Is there a place where people can find each other? Anybody knows anything about that?
Herman, do you want to talk a little bit about your relationship with Roquette? And then maybe in response to the question also about equipment, Herman, can you talk about the pea cream and what you've had to build in order to accommodate that as part of your diet?
Mm-hmm. Initially, I guess probably the first contact that was made was my brother-in-law Conrad, who manages the farm. We heard that the plant was coming, and we're always looking for different sources or ingredients that might fit the diet. And so I guess Christian Delport was one of the first people that we ran into there, and he's just been awesome. I mean, so helpful, understands the nutrition side of it, has done this same concept in France and in other areas. And so he got us a sample early on the pea cream probably half a year ago, and we were able to test it in our region with some of the labs here. And no, it's worked really well. I mean, definitely an investment in getting our building going. I mean, we're looking at it. We want to do this long term, right? Our protein sources in the past have been canola meal, the high fat coming out of, close to Winnipeg. We'd run it out of Saint-Agath. We'd run distillers probably from the mid-states for the most part for years as well. And with these ingredients being available and so close to home, it's sure nice. I mean, with trucking, it's been a bit of an issue lately as well. And for us to just rely on this product to come in has been great. Looking at the building itself, yeah, there was quite an investment there, but we said we're going to do it right if we're going to do it. And we wanted to show Roquette that as well. You can rely on us, right? Let's build a long-term relationship. But there are commitments for us in that as well, in that product will continue to roll to us 365 days a year. So when we move cattle, typically in our province and in most provinces in Canada, a lot of the calf crop comes in the fall, and you'll run your groups through winter and you'll be empty in summer. There's many feedlots that do that. For us, we're looking at keeping a certain amount of cattle right through. Now we're running continuous flow, right? So there's a pretty big commitment there for us as well to do that and find those calves, that'll run through the feedlot in summer as well. So, yeah, and then Roquette's been really good. We've signed a contract with them, for a couple of years, just making this thing affordable, helping us recoup, our costs back on investments into buildings and tanks and whatever we need to do. So that's been really good. And they've done this before. You can tell. I mean, when they're moving in, they set us up really well and give us a really nice understanding of what to expect. So it was pretty smooth.
Yeah, that's excellent. Actually goes to answer one of the questions that popped up here around what type of contract you look to have with suppliers and with Roquette and so forth, and you addressed that. I guess you were proactive in finding that supplier and establishing that relationship, and you maybe got out of your way to find that, and good for you. I guess, is there other ways of people being able to access food waste markets? Do we have a way, maybe an exchange or something like that folks can access? Are you aware of that in other parts of Canada or the world where, maybe you put up like a food waste eBay, you put up stuff and people bid on it or get it? Is there such a thing available out there? Anybody knows about that? Kim, you are muted at this point.
Sorry. There is an organization called Loop Resource, and they work with retailers and I would say probably smaller producers to link together retail waste with producers. But and that would be, of course, only products that fit within the CFIA approved feeds list. And also, just to mention, a lot of these byproducts are, for example, Roquette does also have their byproducts marketed through feed mills as well. So if you're looking to buy it on a smaller, less frequent scale, that's an opportunity as well.
Right. There's a question here that we can follow up on. Is food waste only for feedlots, or are there opportunities elsewhere? Anybody want to take that on? Do we see other opportunities that you can point to for food waste beyond feedlots? I see a nodding head there for Kim or Tim. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I think it gets back to that's about the comments about, does it make sense to fit it into the diet on a nutritional basis? And sure, that depending upon what type of food waste you're talking about, it may be suitable for poultry or swine or dairy or beef. I just mentioned that the advantage of beef or dairy is their ability to use those high fiber content by products, which are typically the component that's not readily consumed by humans in many of the processed foods that we end up having enter the food chain.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And right here in Manitoba, we have cow-calf producers who are using, byproducts from the cereal processing industry. We have, sheep producers who are using, beet pulp. We have producers that are using, a day-old, like expired bread that, is before the best before date, but in perfectly good condition still. We have all of those examples, and that's true across Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. I see another question here in regards to, this goes to Herman. Herman, how far do you truck your potatoes to your farm, and do you wash the potato before feeding, considering the dirt around it?
Actually, our longest haul would be about a 30-mile haul, and our shortest haul is about a 10-mile haul. So, and we have our own trucks, running those. Again, for the most part, our potatoes actually are all washed. They're coming through a line. They're close to being graded out for human consumption. So we have fairly clean potatoes coming through. I mean, you look at the pile and they're decent quality. Just for some reason they're falling out because of, either, they're maybe scabbed a little bit or damaged or whatever, and depending which market they're sorting for, or sizing is maybe a bit of an issue as well. But no, for us, there's a lot of good potatoes there, and the consistency, that's the big thing about a byproduct. If you can find consistency in it, just like Tim was saying earlier, you don't want to be adjusting your rations continually, your moistures, that type of thing. And I'll test potatoes about once a year, and I've done many tests from different varieties as well, just looking for differences in what we're seeing, because we'll see white potato, red potato. Most of ours is table stock, probably 90% goes for table. So very consistent. We're finding, for the most part, nutritionally, it's very consistent.
Great. I see a question here. Back to you, Herman, one more time. Do you use any other byproducts from Roquette, like screenings or pellets, beyond the cream that you are currently utilizing?
No, we haven't. We looked at some of their products that they had available, some of the screening and pellets and so on, and we do a lot of finishing in our feedlots, so we're looking for a fairly high energy product. So our diet only has so much room in it.
Right.
If we're pulling it in for a protein source, we can only drag it down. If that protein source doesn't have a lot of energy coming along with it, we're diluting, right? So that's where the fit, at this point at least, just hasn't been there. But just a comment earlier on one of the questions, they were talking about, are there any other livestock species that are using this? And I know Roquette is sending out to a dairy producer. They're also sending out to hog producers. So there's some really neat systems that have been set up, to feed this, to the other species as well.
That's great. Thanks. I did read a question here regarding streamlining of food waste from the retail industry. Is there any company or anybody doing that type of work? Maybe helping out the large retail outfits in getting that to a farmer? Anybody aware of that here in Manitoba or in other jurisdictions? Maybe it's a business opportunity for folks to engage with the food suppliers. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, I think that's the organization that Kim mentioned, that Loop Group. That's their objective, is to carry out that. I can tell a story though that I experienced. I was up in Calgary, and I was at a composting facility that they were looking at, and they were bringing in a lot of the waste out of the retail sector. And you could certainly see there was blueberries coming in there, and once they touched the pile to be designated as compost, it's illegal to take them home and have them with milk and sugar. But it was all I could do to struggle from not grabbing those boxes and throwing them in the truck and taking them home with me. So the stuff that they're composting looks perfectly good as feed as well. So
that makes sense. There is a question for you, Tim, here that I'm going to read out. How would you rate the starch digestion characteristics of cull potatoes and pea cream compared to a feed barley or feed corn? Would you know the answer to that?
Yeah, that's what I did my PhD on, actually. So the type of starch differs between potatoes and barley and corn. Potato starch is more rich in amylose rather than amylopectin, and generally, particularly in monogastric animals, amylopectin is digested more easier than amylose. In ruminants, there's not as much variation because they have that real complex microbial population, and the bacteria adapt to be able to digest that amylose starch as well. So would I give it exactly the same value as barley? Probably not. I would probably discount it a little bit, but not very much, 5% or something like that. So for the most part, and if the price is right, it's going to make sense for sure.
Right. Thanks for that. See, I didn't plant that question. I didn't know what you did your PhD on, but no, that's a perfect question for you. Herman, there's a question for you, an additional one. It says, can you comment on nutritional quality analysis you have to do? I guess you addressed that a little bit already, that you we look at that. But is there lots of testing involved in your operation? Do you have to spend a lot of money or effort on that? Can you comment on that?
We do spend a fair bit of money for testing. I mean, we find it's worth it, just to find sort of a consistent pattern or basis that we work off of then. Yeah, I would say, again, all our ingredients, everything that goes into the diet is tested continually. We do moistures. I try to do moistures once a week to adjust the diet accordingly as well, so that our dry matter stays accurate in the system, that we're not overfeeding, the ingredients. But these two byproducts that are coming in, they're fairly consistent. And again, talking to Christian, they do give us nutrient analysis coming from the plant as well. They'll give us pH readings on it. They'll give us dry matter on a lot of the product that's coming out of the plant for each load. So we're going to get some good information there as well, just to give us a nice basis to work from.
Sure, that's perfect. Kim, could you repeat the name of the Loop group one more time? One of our audience members is asking. Go ahead.
Yeah. They're a group called Loop Resource, and like I said, I think their scale is relatively small. There was actually the individual's name is Jamie, and but they have been featured in Cattleman Magazine for the work that they're trying to do in terms of connecting producers with retail.
Okay, thanks. So it's Loop Resource, did you say? Just to make sure okay, perfect. Thank you very much. I'm looking at my list. I don't see any other questions at this point. Going once, going twice. Yeah, I think we reached the end of our audience questions. So thank you, everybody, for engaging with us in this conversation. So this was excellent. And I think we have indeed reached the end of our time today. I do want to thank our presenters, Kim, Herman, and Tim, for joining us today. I really enjoyed our discussion. I think it was great information, and thank you for your time you've spent with us today. And for future conversation series, we are planning new events, so please stay tuned for details. One highlight is that the Department of Agribusiness and Agricultural Economics is hosting the 12th Annual Craft Lecture on Wednesday, February 9th at 3 p.m. So please tune into that. And watch for other event notices, whether it's through our social media accounts or by visiting makemanitoba.ca. We will announce them in a variety of ways, so hope to see you there. And if you do not already receive our newsletter, Ag E-News, you can email us at agfoodsci or agfoodsci science at umanitoba.ca to sign up for that excellent newsletter and keep up to date with all the activities at our faculty. I think I'm going to wrap it up right now. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and I wish you the best the rest of the day and a good night. Take care, everyone.
Super.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
You bet.